Okay, so I'm attempting the impossible here. I'm up by the roadside, so you might hear some cars going by. It is Sunday morning, so it's not going to be as heavy, hopefully. Okay, and so we're talking about deontology by way of Immanuel Kant, and likewise, we're going to start off with stoicism. So touching on starting out with stoicism and ending up with some clarifications on deontology. I have another video on Kant's deontology, so this is serving as a supplement to that, okay? So let's start out with a quote from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So this is meditation number 9 from book 3 from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So let me go ahead and read it to you. So, revere your power of judgment. All rests on this to make sure that your directing mind no longer entertains any judgment which fails to agree with the nature or the constitution of a rational being. And this state guarantees deliberate thought, affinity with other men, and obedience to the gods. Okay, so I want to repeat one sentence here. All rests on this to make sure that your directing mind no longer entertains any judgments which fail to agree with the nature or the constitution of a rational being. Okay? So, in other words, that which is natural is rational. And for the Stoic, that which is rational is something that is innate to us as human beings. And likewise, that which is rational is also the order of things in nature. So the order of things in nature is something that we access by way of aiming toward a good, virtuous life as rational agents, as rationally autonomous agents. So what's key in that autonomy is recognizing that we have also free will. So this is a distinction that Kant has. So remember that the Stoic, though, is deterministic, but for Kant, he is going to emphasize free will. But let's stay with Stoicism just for a little bit longer to recognize that also as the autonomous agent also as is taking part in the larger logos of nature, but that is by way of managing one's choices. So the choice that you make is to be rational and to also understand that you shouldn't become impassioned with the emotion. And so this is always the big misunderstanding of Stoicism, where we think that Stoics are not emotional. What we're really thinking of is that Stoics are controlling their emotions. They have rational control over their emotions. And that's what's important for the Stoic. But remember, the key part is this taking part in our rational choices by way of accessing our rational capacity as it is understood in the rational order of things, not only in nature, but also with other people, okay? So always we must emphasize with ethics, we're referring to the way in which we're understanding this as an interaction of ourselves and the larger whole and the community at large, okay? So in other words, Stoicism is helping us understand that we have a reason, and we use that in order to understand the reason of other things, our environment, nature, and other people, as a way that we are good in the world, as the way that we are morally good, which is aimed toward goodness itself, okay? And so that's where we're going to pick up with Immanuel Kant, because we already know that the goal of deontology is non-consequential, and that non-consequential element indicates that we are aiming ourselves toward good in and of itself, okay? And so we know that, and so there are similarities with stoicism in the sense that we're using our rational powers in order to understand the rational order of things. But with Kant, the way that we're accessing reason is by way of our free will, okay? And so, so now let's go ahead and switch gears to think of the difference between the hypothetical imperative and the categorical imperative. So with the hypothetical imperative, you don't have the urgency or the moral obligation that you do with a categorical imperative. So the categorical imperative is indicating that this is a moral obligation. How is it that we know it's a moral obligation? By way of the categorical imperative, and that is to know what the categorical imperative is, which is to act on that maxim that you can will as a universal law. If you could apply that to any situation by which you're about to act, then it is a moral imperative. It is a categorical imperative that should be observed at all times, okay? So if the answer is yes, you can act as if you could will it to be you could act as if, act only on that maxim that you can will as a universal law, act only on that rule that you can will as a universal law whenever you set forth to act, to do something. If the answer is yes, this can be a universal law, then that means that it is no longer a hypothetical imperative, and then it turns into a categorical imperative, okay? So the point about the hypothetical imperative is such that this is something like, for example, if as students, in order to get a degree in engineering, let's say, you have to meet prerequisites by way of taking a class, and that is a hypothetical imperative that enables you to get your degree. But it's not something that everyone should do, okay? It's something that you should do to get your degree, but it's not something that everyone should do, okay? Because you cannot apply the categorical imperative to it in order to understand your point of action or what you should do. So whenever you're wondering what's good or bad for the deontologist, always remember that if the categorical imperative could be applied to it, and the answer is affirmative, yes, my action that I'm about to take can be a universal law, then we know that the action is deemed as good, okay? So then let's go ahead and switch gears to the talk on the golden rule, so hold on. So right off the top, I have a little footnote I want to read from the groundwork of the metaphysic of morals on the golden rule. What happens is that students often are hearing the two versions of the categorical imperative, and they often mistakenly think that this is the golden rule. And so I always remind them that this is something that Kant explicitly disagreed with. That, in other words, his categorical imperative is not just like the golden rule. So let's go ahead and read this footnote from the groundwork of metaphysic of morals. So the groundwork of the metaphysic of morals is really where Kant's moral theory is working itself out. Okay, so quote, "Let no one think here that the trivial quod tibi fieri non vis, alteri non ficeres, in other words, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, otherwise known as the golden rule, can serve as a standard or principle, for it is merely derivative of our principle being the categorical imperative. Although subject to various qualifications, it cannot be a universal law, since it contains the ground neither of duties to oneself, nor of duties of kindness to others, for many a man would readily agree that others should not help him if only he could be dispensed of affording help to them, nor finally of strict duties toward others, for on this basis the criminal would be able to dispute with the judges who punish him, and so on. So there you have a way that Kant is distinguishing the golden rule from the categorical imperative. So remember that the categorical imperative is what? Let's go ahead and look at it one more time. We have the first and second versions of it. So the first version is act only on that maxim that you can will it to be a universal law. The second version is always treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, never simply as a means, but always at the same time an end. So that one is the one that sounds oftentimes as the golden rule. But remember that the golden rule, treat others as you would, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is too subjective. So the reason why it's too subjective is that the way in which you want to be treated is not necessarily something that can be universal, okay? So in other words, the categorical imperative is suggesting that you are asking yourself, what could be universal for everyone? That's how I should act. Whereas the golden rule is suggesting everyone should act according to how I want to be treated, okay? Or everyone should treat me how I want to be treated. So the way that I want to be treated is too subjective because that cannot be universal, okay? So in other words, the way that I want to be treated is not something that everyone understands. So in a way, I could have unrealistic expectations as to what it is that I expect from people if I expect them to treat them how I want to be treated. Instead, my actions should always be directed toward, are my actions something that I could deem as universal from this moment as my duty? If the answer is yes, then it is deontological and correct and good to do for its own sake in a non-consequential way, okay? So I think that's a good place to end, and why don't we take it from there, see how we did with the wind, okay? Thanks.